All right, welcome back to the show. In case you're just joining us, it's time for our discussion right now. I'm Moneyline with Nancy. It is on African Independent Television, where we try as much as possible every weekday to keep you up to speed with what's happening in the business and financial environment, and even not what's happening. You know, we try as much as possible to put perspectives into some issues. Like today, we will be looking at northern Nigeria as we prepare for elections on Saturday. That's state elections. I started this discussion yesterday for those of you that have just started watching. My guest to my immediate right is Rabiu Tukur Hassan. He's an economic analyst. Welcome to the show and thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much.
Inegedu is also joining me today. He is a legal practitioner. It doesn't hurt to have lawyers around, does it?
No, it doesn't at all. It's when you need one that you know the relevance.
The relevance.
Yes.
I don't think I need any right now.
Well, you always need one.
You always, no, yes, you always need
always
one.
need one.
You will always need one, true. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Yesterday we started, we gave a background, I am my guest. We laid some kind of perspectives yesterday on the program because why I said we should look at the whole of this week, we should focus on the states actually, because we've actually found out that majority of the attention is on the central. Yeah. You know, oh, Buhari has done this, Buhari has not done this, federal government has done this, federal government has not done this. But we should also, you know, turn our attentions to the states. And what a better time to do that this week as we prepare for March 9 elections. So that's what I'm doing this whole week. So I'm focusing on states, I'm focusing on ourselves, on our geopolitical zones. But we had to divide them into geopolitical zones because we can't do 36 states in 5 days. Yeah. So we had to break it down to geopolitical zones. Yesterday, today, the northern Nigeria. So that's a background for those of us that just started watching. Yesterday, it was also laid here at the table that, in fact, even with data, statistics tells us that poverty, hunger, everything is prevalent in the north. And I wondered why. I was giving those answers yesterday. But let me have your own perspective. Why you think that the indices for measuring poverty are so much in the north?
Good afternoon or good morning, our distinguished viewers. Yes, it has become a narrative that easily gets, spread across. The poverty is more prevalent in Nigeria, especially on the northern part of the country, in the northern part of the country. And talking of the northern part of the country, you're talking of 3 geopolitical zones that have a landmass that is as big as 3/4 or 3/5, 3/5 of the landmass of Nigeria. And of course, the preponderance of poverty amongst communities is still higher when you consider a comparison between that part of the country and other parts of the country. One, yes, the most fundamental things that determines poverty is basically, the basic thing is the level of education, because poverty and education are 2 issues that that have this very synchronous relationship, where there is higher level of illiteracy, there is high probability of you having a lot of poverty. And therefore, that part of the country, given its historical antecedents on education, and I think it is a narrative that is well accepted and well tolerated, even by people that are of that enclave. Now, having said that, the interpretation of what constitutes poverty, we have to equally accept and understand that what defines poverty equally depends on the perception that the person has about poverty. We are more or less like dependent on a defined concept of poverty which has come to be accepted everywhere. But relatively, if you go to different communities, you might see that poverty in one part of the country or one part of a community differ in its dynamics with poverty on the other side of the community. The economics of poverty talks about income per capita. It talks about distribution of wealth amongst communities. Talk about access to education, healthcare, and social services, and what have you. Now, if we put all these together into your definition of poverty, definitely you would note that the levels of poverty could differ from community to community, dependent on the preponderance of some of these dynamics you see in the community. But however, my own personal conception of poverty is that it is relative. It cannot be generic. We cannot have a universal definition of poverty and to be interpreted, to be applied and interpreted on every community with the same definition. And definitely we have to look at peculiarities to be able to actually...
So in other words, you seem not to agree that poverty is prevalent in the north. Is that it?
There is poverty, but it may not necessarily be as defined by the concept that we all generally... Okay, define
poverty as an economic analyst. What's poverty to you?
For me, poverty as an economist, as an economic analyst, starts from the fact that, one, what of the issue of, are you secure? Secure, I mean physical security. Are you educated? Do you have access to basic needs of human being, food, shelter, and clothing? How much access do you have to these basic things? And then you build on top of this. And now, if you look at the geopolitics, the northern geopolitical zone, there are so many factors that you find which generally might not be the doing of the individual on the street or the community. Those could have issues, for example, the issue of security. The issue of security is exclusively the responsibility of the central government, even though communities are expected to contribute. And where there are security breaches here and there, and you find that these matters are still have not been taken care of, and which forms the pillar of defining whether there is poverty or not, the issue of security. So you find that it is not necessarily a matter that the poor man on the street has control over.
Now, if you take a look at, let me hold you a bit so that I can bring in Eddie. If you take a look at even the indices that constitute poverty, issues of education, which you've spoken about, here in the country, I think the state provides universal basic education. Issues of sanitation, which is very key. A lot of people don't even have where to defecate. Their toilet systems are not good. It's also adds to poverty. You're talking of hunger, no food. You're talking of even diseases, no access to healthcare and all of that. So this, if you take a look at the wholesomeness of everything we are talking about, it can tell you that either someone is poor or a region is suffering from poverty. But I understand where you are coming from, but let me get Eddie's perspective. Eddie, do you agree with Hassan? And what's your own definition of poverty, especially in northern Nigeria?
Let me start of leadership. It tells you what they think about the people.
So was that really true? Because when I heard it, when I saw it, I almost did not want to believe it.
I
almost did not want to. Empowering your people with wheelbarrows.
We went beyond that.
Empowering them with shoe shining,
with tea tables, and one went and bought coffins for all the mosques, and he said it's a permanent program. So when you sit down and start evaluating what they call contribution or empowerment to their people, then you start asking questions about the quality of leadership itself.
Now, what does it also say about the leadership of the elites in the north? Because in as much as you have people in the north, there are a lot of elites. All of you from...
You call me an elite?
Yeah, okay. Okay. If I don't call you an elite, at least an enlightened person or an intellectual from the north. Let me put it that way. A lot of intellectuals from the north. What do you think are some of the tangibles that could come out of this intellectual leaders of the north that could change this narrative?
Okay.
that could change the narrative. What do you think?
Is it
Yes,
myself?
yes.
Now, I think let us not make the mistake of seeing the northern Nigeria as a political element that could be different from the national characteristics. Now, politics in Nigeria, across all the regions, are basically played in the same way. It's only the
culture
the culture that determines how it is seen. Now, these same problems we are talking about, if you look at the national politics, it's, I think, the same thing. Our political structure, democracy, has actually not been able to, in a lot of cases, deliver the best kind of leaders we need. What it is about is just about providing us with the desirable. You understand me? Not what actually is the most important thing that we need. Both from the party, if you look at all the party structure, you look at our cultural structure, you see that generally the linkage between the people's aspiration and what the political elite plays on the agenda are always two different things. People want to develop, people want to grow, people want to be educated. But if you see the narrative discussed, you see the discuss that is on the tables of political elite, you find that you see discussions about the persons, not about the system. You see discussions about who gets what, not about how do we spray prosperity across the land. And all over the regions, if you go, it is the same story. But like the northern part of Nigeria has one peculiar or unique feature that you find in all this. And like you suggested, poverty has been seen to be like wearing a northern cap, like the governor had said.
The one that suggested it.
Yes, it was the governor.
It was the governor
no, I
that
understand.
said so.
Like the governor suggested.
Yeah.
Now, he is a politician, and playing the games of poverty sometimes is used by politicians as a tool to bargain for more from the national whole. But I want to suggest that have we been able to, across the board, mainstream economic and development issues in our political discourses? If you look across the polity, no. People discuss about persons. People discuss about parties. People discuss about parties only because of the persons that are inside, not because of the party manifesto. All our political parties are of the same appealing. It's only about who moves where and where that drives people to move from where to where. What we are looking at is politics that should be defined by the agenda on the table. And I have to say, if you want to discuss development, economic development, none of our politicians has ever mainstreamed it as part of his agenda. If you look across all political parties.
You know, as we were preparing for this show, you know, it's because we talked about it yesterday and we're continuing the discussion today. It had to come down to, I had to look at, or when I was thinking through it, oh, how do I handle the show and all of that? And what came to my mind, I really needed to know how much the states have been getting, at least, let's say in the last 4 years. You know, if we have that card, we can actually put it on the screen. So we put together states budgets for Northeast, Northwest, as well as North Central. And calculating all these monies, they run in billions of naira. Some in the last 5 years, in the last 4 years or so, totaling over 500 billion, sometimes 600 billion. And what came to my mind, I said, these are huge sums of monies. But when you go there, can I really count the tangibles, and am I really seeing value for money? Why is it that, you know, that destitution is still there, which I'm really sad about? Because for those of you that have been following the show over the years, I know we can do better than where we are right now, concerning even the whole economy of Nigeria. But we are not doing as much as we should do. Now, let's bring it to this point that I talked about yesterday, that I would expand on it today. The Northeast Development Commission, for example, that's just been established. I think it was on Sunday that the ex-GF, Boss Mustafa, did say that about 55 billion naira has been earmarked for the takeoff of NEDC, 10 billion naira initial takeoff money, then 45 billion naira for the budgetary allocation. How do you think that this would also add, you know, to the improvement of the North, bearing in mind that the Northeast is also ravaged with Boko Haram insurgency and even insecurity, largely in some other parts, but with different faces apart from Boko Haram? What do you think? Yes.
Now, when we talk about the figures, when we crunch the figures, I think when you add up figures for federal intervention in the region, you probably have 150% of the figures you are seeing. Now, the economics of whether we have been able to manage our financial resources efficiently and effectively. Efficiency in terms of the fact that whether these financial resources had been able to provide opportunities for communities and for individuals to see prosperity in their livelihoods and in their living. That's a question that I can tell you, you find the same feature everywhere in Nigeria. Particularly, you would see a lot of that equally in the North, as you would see it all over the regions. Now, our political machinery had not been able to deliver development, given the enormous amount of resources that has been made available. Let me give you a small statistics that will actually complement what you have said. When you take the total budgetary allocation of a state, for example, like Kano, that I know, if you crunch the figures and see how much would, within the 5 years that you're talking about, how much economic value would that resources have accrued per capita?
Per capita.
You would be surprised that I was telling people that if the state government would have been distributing, for example, hypothetically, would have been distributing these resources to individuals on per capita basis, you will end up having millionaires in the next 4 or 5 years.
They're just giving them.
Yes, I mean hypothetically, cash.
Yes.
You would have created millionaires. But unfortunately, the distribution mechanism and the efficiency in the distribution process has failed. And one of the reasons is that we have a largely over-bloated infrastructure. I mean, public service infrastructure. 70–80% of all these resources goes the maintenance to maintain the recurrent expenses. And the same problem is what the Federation is facing. The federal government spends 70–80% of its expenses on recurrence. People keep creating institutions, and you're just telling me that the Northeast Commission has been created. Northeast Development Commission has been created, and that's another infrastructure. This 50 billion that you're talking about, you should not be surprised if you see 30% of it being deployed in creating the infrastructure, employing the elite kids that have, you understand me? Employing elite kids that have been able to study, to have the best this thing, and then creating a very elaborate infrastructure. And in the end, the 50 billion that has been budgeted for development of the Northeast will be spent in maintaining the aperture of the institution.
Now,
against deploying the resources to actually do the good that it's supposed to do.
Now, coming to the North Central, very well endowed. You're talking of Benue, Kogi, Kwara, which other states? Nasarawa State, Taraba. You know, these are states that are well endowed, that they may not even need to come to Abuja to ask for money if they know what they are doing. In Kogi State, we know the mineral resources and all of that. Benue State, the food basket of the country, nation. You know, a whole lot. What do you think should be the solutions moving forward?
What I think in the North Central particularly, you go to Niger State, there are loads of mineral resources, gold and every other thing as well. Now, going forward, the most important thing is, one, we need, like Hassan said, are riding motorcycles everywhere. And that is what the political leaders normally give to them as empowerment. Because, oh, this is what everybody is doing, this is what you need. You go there, there was a day I was talking to one guy, and the guy had a master's degree, but he prefers to sit back there too because he feels it is his comfort zone. If he goes out of the state, what will he go and do?
What is it doing?
Riding a motorcycle.
Oh.
So when he now tells people I have a master's degree, and he sits down there because he feels very comfortable with it, with the hope that tomorrow something good will come out of that place. There are no manufacturing industries. The manner of employment of people into the civil service of the states is crooked. Nobody looks at what you can do or what you can contribute.
Now,
so
that brings me to the question of how critical are state elections to the economies of the state? Because just like I said at the beginning, we shouldn't all, everybody's attention be in Abuja. We should all focus attention to each state, wherever we are, to also hold those leaders accountable. So how important would the elections on Saturday be? That is, if the people actually think they are important.
Yes, this election is very, very important. A lot of the governors are going into their second terms. And with their performance templates, ordinarily, under a very normal circumstance, people should be able to judge and see whether they need to pass across, or there will be need for some form of an amendment or a change that should be. But however, like we started in our discussion, the issue of development has not been properly mainstreamed in our political discourse. It is the personalities that are more important, seen as more important, and the frivolities around. The frivolities of, the local geopolitics. In every place you go, there is this geopolitical. These are some of the most important things that our voters actually look at as against the most important fundamental. Now, I want to equally complement a discussion which she just concluded, discussing about poverty. In the beginning of my discussion, I said poverty can have different kind of, to conclude is like, there is something that is very important which we have not looked at in actually determining our interpretation of poverty. There is what we call the culture of poverty. And then there is poverty in itself. That is the definition that everybody accepts as poverty, access to this, access to that. Let me give you, if you find a law-abiding Fulani herdsman that have like 100 cows, at 100,000 naira, you have a millionaire. But he had chosen, because of illiteracy, not to be educated, to stay in the bush, to live in the kind of very, very unhealthy environment.
So in that case, you're saying, would that person be a poor person?
No, that's why the statement by Masari seems to be a bit more intellectual than what we have seen from the Borno side. Now, there is what we call the culture of poverty. My colleague is just speaking of an incident in Benue. I'm a very good son of Benue too, on another side. Where people will sit down in the shades and then the fruits are falling down and getting rotted. That's the culture of poverty. It is not that poverty as defined by the general definition we see on the street is what actually applies everywhere. This is the situation all over. Where governments and where our political elites have not been able to drive people to understand the importance of harnessing economic potentials in the state and making them into creating opportunities that will create prosperity, will continue to have the same situation we would have. As against, and then politicians would always discuss the issue of poverty at the national level to make case for additional resource allocation or for additional attention. But in reality, the resources and the potential for growth, the potential for development is in our backyard. And we don't seem to really understand that that's where the solution to our economic vows is. As against looking at the center, anytime you need more attention. And what we need basically is there's a need for a lot of structuring, both horizontally and diagonally. The federation, the way it is, the federal government has a lot of leverage on national economic resources, be much more than states. And I'm saying is, if that is going to...
States should be in control?
The states should be empowered, not in control. Empowered to, for example, have opportunities to access the national financial resources just like the federal government can. For example, the government has created what they call the Fiscal Responsibility Act. And this is an act that say, hey, nobody should loan from the national financial resources until I say yes or no.
Yes.
This is a federal legislation. Lagos State, being an enlightened state and a more developed state, actually challenged those issues. For example, The national financial resources, the whole of, let me talk in a layman's language, the whole of the money available in Nigeria is everybody's money. It's yours and mine. But when the whole of this national financial resources is pooled together under a basket overseen by the CBN and in pockets of banks, who determines access? From individuals, state institutions, and if you look at the breakdown of these, the way these financial resources is distributed, you see that the federal government, being the boss on top, takes more.
Yeah, more than 50%.
It's not more than, it takes 92%. The next state, being an enlightened state that takes a lot of that, is Lagos, by virtue of the political economy of Lagos, if you understand what I mean. You understand me? It's Lagos. The state with the biggest debts is Lagos.
Yes.
And then why should it be that it is the biggest that takes the biggest loans that develop faster than those that have restricted access, for example?
Okay.
So these are issues that we look. That's why I was talking about structurally, diagonally, and horizontally.
Eddie, come in here just before we end the show. You know, March 9 will be very critical. I tend to look at elections in a different way, you know, in the sense that it's a time or it's a period for us to choose our leaders, because even the political leaders determines what happens. They make the policies and all of that. Yeah. But the way we've seen it in Nigeria, it's like the elected officials come up with so much enormous spoils, so a lot of people are, you know, struggling to get there because of the kind of spoils they will be availed to them. It's just, you know, perhaps it should begin to see an evolution in our political process. But what do you think, especially as March 9 approaches, with the state elections, vis-a-vis the leaders that will be elected in the north?
Let me borrow from him.
Very
because
quickly.
The political structure, if we continue with the political structure as it is, unapologetically, I would say that the North will remain where we are. Because in as much as we try to do a comparison with the South, I think there are some aspects, elements in the South that are light years ahead of any of the states in the North, unless we want to deceive ourselves. Now, the culture of politicking in the North itself is totally at variant with what is obtained even there in the South. If we must look at that. Now, we have a system whereby some of the Christian-dominated aspects of it, they just go to churches and say, God said, this is my turn, I must do this, and a lot of people agree with them. In the Muslim-dominated aspect, somebody just goes there and throws it that, look, this is what Allah has said, it is the same. And then at the end of the day, instead of looking at the vital issues itself, like he pointed out, we start looking at persons who have more credibility or link or connection to God than their own faith in particular. So, going forward, we need to de-emphasize that individuality in our politics up north, whether we like it or not. Yeah.
Do you think the people of the North are ready for a change in narrative? Yes or no?
Yes, you know, I think they're ready for change in narrative. But I can still tell you, like he referred to what happened in Benue State about the fruits falling down, where the policies are not there or the structures are not even not there. The man cannot take these fruits on his own head and start looking for markets for them where there are no roads. Yeah. For instance, there are no roads. He doesn't even know which particular market or where these things are needed. So these are part of the issues. Then the man in the man in Borno State who said poverty wears a northern scarf. The fishing industry from the Lake Chad, which is one of the most thriving, from where it even has a larger haul of fish supply to the country than even what we get from the rivers, inland rivers. Now, all those things have been ravaged. He has not told us the scorecard of what he has even done.
Okay. I think we'll leave it at this point, but let's quickly take comments from our viewers. Mwafo Bina says, poverty in my state, Anambra in parentheses, is not as shameful as what we see in other blue economy states in the north, such as Kano, Sokoto, Katsina. Anyway, we'll be talking about South, South, and Southeast tomorrow on the show. So it's not just, people shouldn't just say, oh, Nancy is concentrating on the north. No. You know, so we'll take all the geopolitical zones. We'll be looking at South, South, and Southeast on Wednesday and Thursday. Dele says, just like in any election, the winners of the gubernatorial election on Saturday will positively and adversely affect the states. Wafo says the North is suffering from what I describe as developmental poverty. Dele says just like in any election. Okay, I think I've read that before. Osarame says Hassan is still living in the past. Let him be sincere to himself. It is not a time to cover up. Hassan,
Thank you.
you are covering up according to